man who told him that he did not want to see him on his property again, and then he opened fire.
This is Ralph, a 16-year-old kid who was shot in the head for ringing the doorbell of the wrong house while trying to pick up his little brothers. And his shooting has spurred protests, with people wanting the man who shot this unarmed black teen who wasn't breaking the law and just rung the doorbell to the wrong house to go to jail.
But as a chief of police, I do recognize the racial components of this case.
Now, this situation is not too unlike the unaliving of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman.
You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
Mr. Zimmerman has made the statement of self-defense.
In this case, they would have did it for a white kid.
We all remember how a black teen was unalived by a grown man for having a hoodie on.
The affidavit says a struggle ensued between the two. Zimmerman has said Martin slammed his head repeatedly into the pavement.
He died 70 to 80 feet from the back door. He's just trying to get home.
Trayvon Martin buying Skittles and iced tea at the 7-Eleven. And tonight, police recordings where, for the first time, we hear eyewitnesses describe Zimmerman's behavior.
And again, while not committing a crime, he was unalived, and well, we all remember how Zimmerman beat that case. But this situation is a little different because the victim, young Ralph, survived being shot by the old crazy white man with a gun. And his story, Andrew Lester, the shooter, told the cops is very different. But we're gonna dive into all of that, what exactly happened that day, because both stories are insane. And unlike those other podcasts that just tell you what happened, we're gonna go through the details and why is the stand your ground law and the big black man scared me into shooting him defense probably won't work in this case, because this is news you can use with the Church of Sh0t, and I'm your host, Sh0t, where we give you 3 rules to live by so this never happens to you. Rule number 1, know how stand your ground works if you're going to use it. According to Lester, he heard his doorbell ring and then grabbed his gun. He then claims he saw a man pulling on the door handle, and he believed the teen was trying to break into his home and was so scared to death, quote unquote, that he shot him. Unfortunately for Lester, maybe that would fly. That was the only story, like in the case of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman.
You think if he was a white 16-year-old boy and he rang that door, do you think it would have been the same outcome?
But apparently the cops realized that was all cap, and there's a few reasons. If we compare Ralph's story, who apparently got lost on his way to pick up his siblings and mistakenly ended up at the wrong house that had a similar address to the one that he was supposed to be going to. According to Ralph, he did not pull the door handle and only rung the doorbell and waited for someone to answer. When Lester did answer the door, he said, "Don't come around here," and shot through the glass storm door because he had opened up the front door, shooting Ralph in the head. Ralph then fell to the ground. Lester thought it was appropriate at this time to shoot the young kid again, this time hitting him in the arm, before Ralph was able to get up and then take off in a panic, trying to find help from neighbors by knocking on their doors and screaming for help. Now, when we get the story from the actual victim, Ralph, you can quickly see how stand your ground and the council doctrine don't apply here. I am a firearm instructor, and I can tell you right now, that's not how any of that works. In the state that they were in, they have the right to stand your ground and to defend their property. The problem is that only works if 1, they're actually breaking into your home, and 2, if you're actually afraid for your life. You can't just say, he rang the doorbell, and I got so scared that now I am shooting him, and you think that that is going to keep you from going to jail. And in rule number 2, you'll see how this is different from what happened to George Zimmerman and Trayvon. We're going there. But no, you're going to have to prove to law enforcement that there was a reasonable situation in which you felt scared for your life. Can't say, oh, he opened my mailbox and I felt scared that he was going to take my life or break into my home and I shot him. If that's the case, then everyone that works at Uber Eats and Amazon should quit now. But moving on to rule number 2, every story has 2 sides unless the other side is dead. Lester was initially detained by police but was released after a few hours of investigative work, which was part of the reason why the protest sparked. Investigators need more time to get evidence and hadn't talked to Ralph yet. Now, according to a neighbor who called 911 after Ralph came to her door bleeding and was told by the emergency operator to stay inside for her safety as the shooter's location was unknown, she initially complied but later went out to actually help Ralph. Good on her. That's when he told her that he was just looking for his little brothers and how he was on the school track team and played in the school band as he was showing her the injuries to his head and arm. The neighbor said he was brave and strong, and according to recent news, Ralph has been released released from the hospital, but is struggling after, being shot in the head, like probably anyone would be, which means he is allowed to tell his side of the story. If Ralph had not survived like Trayvon Martin, the homeowner could tell any story he liked, and with no witnesses or much evidence could possibly get away with this. But instead, there are now warrants out for his arrest. 2 felony counts, 1 first-degree assault, and 1 charge for armed criminal action. Now, why is this important? Well, going back to rule number 2, there's 2 sides to every story unless one side is dead. Luckily, Ralph is alive to tell his side of the story, unlike Trayvon, and with George Zimmerman was able to basically get away because the only witness of the crime is the person that committed it. With Ralph being alive, he told the real story, and with no motive to break into his home, it's not looking good for good old Lester. But this brings us to rule number 3. You're never too old to go to jail, and to be honest with you guys, this is more of a celebration because luckily that's a thing. At 84, if you don't know how to handle a firearm responsibly, you do not deserve to have one. And if you discharge that firearm irresponsibly, I don't know if that's actually a word, but if you do, you deserve to go to jail. Now, this is still very early on in the entire process, and he still has to be prosecuted or see if he will take a plea deal or how everything plays out. But we will be keeping an eye on this and keeping you updated based on what we find out and what evolves in this situation. But let us know what you think. Do you think he deserves to go to jail? Do you think there was something else happening here? Do you think that this case is at all like Trayvon Martin, or is that a reach? Feel free to comment. I will be responding. Something like this happened a couple weeks ago in DC, but both the homeowner and the kid were black. Therefore, it wasn't newsworthy. Hey, fair enough. But also, wrong is wrong, and that person should be prosecuted if that happened. And it really is similar. Land of the free, home of the too scared to answer the door without a gun. Well, yeah, facts. I'm answering mine with a gun. Hey, look, you just gotta be smart about when you use it. Kansas City homeowner not under arrest and is at home while this 16-year-old boy is in the hospital. Shame on the police department. Now, luckily that has been remedied. I don't know if he's actually under arrest yet, but their warrants are out again. Now, that was the reason why the protest spurred, was because he was able to go home and was not held while the police were investigating when they probably could have held him. But I'm guessing at 84, they didn't think he'd get far if he did try to run. The race is totally irrelevant here. Question is, how can you shoot someone who's in the hospital right now and be out of custody within 2 days? And fair enough, I don't know if this is necessarily race motivated or not, at the very least, but even if it's not, wrong is wrong, and this situation should have never happened. And he could be a racist, or he could just be senile and probably shouldn't have had a gun to begin with. But that's our story for the day, and we will keep you updated. I am Joe Stone, and this is the Church of Joe Stone podcast, with news you can use. They just tell you what happened, and we give you 3 rules to make sure that it never happens to you. I will see you the next one.